Shut up and sit down.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another MBA Career Discussion. With me today is my colleague from INSEAD in France, Mr. Michael Scott. Michael has worked in education for almost 14 years, with the last 3.5 years at INSEAD's Career Development Center. Previously, Michael has covered healthcare, retail and luxury goods, and is now covering technology, media and telecoms, also known as TMT. So Michael, an Irishman and a Scotsman, it's like almost like the start of a bad joke, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. We just need to, it's a shame we're not in a bar.
Exactly. So it's, I was just speaking earlier, I was saying you're kind of in a bit of a strange position. So you are covering technology, but of course nowadays what industry does not have an element of technology in it. You kind of have to balance across many different industries, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Tech covers a lot of bases. So I guess the way we're looking at it, at least within our team, within the CDC, the Career Development Center, is that I tend to look after the big the key accounts in tech, so the big techs, the GAFAs, and I look after the telcos, obviously, but also the kind of the hyper growth tech-enabled companies. So like your Ubers or your delivery heroes, those types of profiles of organizations. But as you said, technology is everywhere these days, so I have to be quite collaborative and check on what everybody else is doing as well, because there's a lot of overlap with the other sectors.
Absolutely. So you're covering Europe and also the Americas. Do you see much of a cultural difference in the way that companies recruit, or the way that students should approach companies in both of those regions? I know for Asia, I guess it's quite different. I would recommend a different approach than my counterpart in France would recommend in terms of networking, but how do you see it?
I mean, from my point of view, I see recruitment very much as a kind of universal discipline. So the ways in which the recruiters are going around and sourcing talent, it kind of doesn't change whether it's Europe or the United States. I think some of the key differences are that perhaps, if we're talking about MBAs specifically, because that's the population that we're working with most of the time, I think the US is a much more homogenous market than Europe, and because the MBA is much more common, much more standard in the US, there's perhaps more of a structured offer there in terms of what the companies have to propose in terms of their offering for MBA graduates. And then if you look at Europe, we have a long tradition of pre-experienced master's programs, graduate programs. So often you find companies have already that structured offer for graduates, and perhaps MBAs are treated more like experienced hires. And of course they do fall somewhere in between, right? Somewhere between early careers and your experienced hires. So so I think that's really for me the key difference. I think also it depends a lot on the size and stage of the organization. So if you're looking at a very established large tech company, they're going to behave in ways similar to a large conglomerate or a large corporate. So probably very decentralized, very well resourced HR teams operating in different countries, or at a regional level for EMEA, for instance. Whereas if you're looking at like a hyper growth scale up, perhaps they don't have like an established HR team yet. So it's really more the business that's reaching out directly to us to look for talent, and they may even have be working with with an agency. So they have like an in-house recruiter, but is actually a professional consultant from a firm that they've engaged to grow the company by 200 or 300 or 400 people in the space of a year to a year and a half.
Sure. And also we've mentioned that you've worked in healthcare and retail previously as well. Do you see, just touching on differences, is there much difference in how those sort of companies would operate, and again how students should approach these companies when they're looking for opportunities?
A lot of the principles of the job search are the same, just simply because the companies, depending on the size and the stage that they're at, are recruiting in similar ways. I think definitely, having worked with consumer-facing industries, so retailers, luxury, luxury goods, FMCG, quick service restaurants, travel, hospitality, these kind of players, especially with the companies that have a kind of heavy tradition based rooted in marketing. They're really looking for effective brand managers, people with with good marketing skills, people who know how to tell a story. They can tell a brand story and are passionate about that. I think the tech companies, by contrast, they're looking for people who are very analytical, who are data driven, who can take decisions based on data, because these are very data rich organizations, and it doesn't really matter about the function. It's kind of, they're looking for the same qualities. So it could be marketing or finance, but all the decisions are going to be taken based on the data that they have, and that's what's going to drive the strategy and the decisions that are taken moving forward. So I think for me that kind of are two differences that I've been able to see in terms of at least in the conversations that I've been having with recruiters, and in terms of being able to kind of work with students to kind of help them to understand, okay, what kind of environment where do I fit best?
Right. I'd had this discussion previously with Zainab, one of our team members, on how we approach, or how we suggest that students approach different companies, and especially across the regions. And one of the differences that I noticed was, I would often suggest that students reach out to C-level, to CEOs or CFOs or what have you, in Asia especially. I've always felt that here it's people seem to be quite open to engaging with discussions with INSEAD MBA students, and the opposite. I was told that would be the opposite within countries in Europe. Maybe it's a more mature market, and some of these companies are quite traditional in how they approach things. So I guess there's always differences in the geographies, but also the sectors. Nowadays we're hearing, of course, we're still in this COVID pandemic situation globally, and we're hearing lots about the new normal. I was wondering, what does that mean for you and the companies that you're working with?
It's new normal for me, and INSEAD, that's like the pivot to everything online. So with all the engagements that we're having with students, but also with companies, it's all happening like this, right? It's all happening via Zoom or by other video conferencing tools, and that's a big shift. So there's that that shift away from in-person engagements or in-person networking. But in terms of like the new normal, in terms of the business environment, I think it's been less disruptive, at least for the TMT companies that I'm working with currently, than for other sectors. E-commerce right now is booming. Obviously, we still need the infrastructure underlying, the internet to be able to work and socialize and shop, for instance. So I think my companies have been digital first companies. They have struggled less to adapt to remote working and an online environment, because they were largely that way anyway. Yeah. So I think for what I'm seeing, and also on a personal level, it's more like what are the longer lasting behavioral changes that we will see. So I think since we've had restrictions lifted in France, at least, we've seen a kind of a rush to go back to the way things were as they were before. And at the same time, you still see every day you see small things that just were never the case before. So definitely, people wearing masks in public transport and so on and so forth, which was never never really the case previously. Even though we've always had tourists visit from Asia who already had these behavioral cultural practices already based on their experience in previous pandemics. So I think the lasting changes we'll notice those gradually over time, and I think one of those for more generally will be increased remote working for sure, as companies realize that the people, there are efficiencies to be made in terms of time and costs, and also they can scale their workforce by having more remote working. So those are my predictions.
Okay. Are there any areas within tech that you see a spike in growth? Any trends in any specific areas?
Some of it, I believe, is kind of pre-COVID anyway. So definitely, we're seeing, cloud has been a big area for a while now. Before COVID, mobility was a big area. So whether that was, scooters or, ride sharing or food delivery, that has been disrupted somewhat during the pandemic. But certainly, that is a big is a big growth area. And this shift towards workplace tools as well, with existing players like Slack, but there are many new ones now as well, and you have even the big players like Facebook, for instance, building out their building out workplace so that they can compete with the likes of Microsoft, who have Teams and so on. So all of this is really important, I think, in the pivot towards digital for all companies, regardless of the sector, and so definitely I see a lot of activity there. And in terms, I spoke about infrastructure earlier, so you also see companies in the data centers and who are the the cloud providers and so on. They're very important. So the one area, in fact, that I've noticed during the pandemic is really logistics, because especially with e-commerce booming, goods need to be moved around, right? And so before, e-commerce has always been a big area, but now where they need the best and the brightest is really on that logistics piece, because that's where they've had the the toughest problems to solve. So that's something that has spiked in the last 4 or 5 months that I didn't see in previous years.
Okay. So what would you say to people that are looking to move to Europe for their next opportunities, if they're from Asia or the Americas? What should they keep in mind when they're making that move?
So as I said earlier, Europe is not one homogeneous state like the US. I mean, even though you have all the 50 states within the US and there's a lot of diversity there, in Europe you have a whole bunch of countries with different languages and different cultural traditions. So it's I think it's important to know the market that you're moving into. Definitely, one of the things that the recruiters in Europe are looking for is local languages. So even if the working language in the company that you target is normally English, it's still important to have French or German or Spanish or Italian, a continental European language. That's really important. And that there's not one administration either. Even though we have the European Union, a lot of the decisions are taken at a national level. So with things like visas and permits, that's all done at the local country level, and there are big differences in terms of the politics of each country, so of each nation state. So you have some companies in Europe which are quite open to welcoming international talent. So you can cite examples like the Netherlands or Germany, for instance, and then you can kind of contrast that to to the UK, where they have take a stricter policy on immigration. So I think your experience of moving to Europe will depend on kind of which country you move to, and whether it's an English speaking country, or whether they have like a favorable climate towards immigration, or or not. So
there's one thing I wanted to ask you. So each time, 2 times a year, we have our on-campus recruiting, and you always bring tons of great companies. I want to know how you do your business development, and also, so a lot of the time when I'm doing my business development, I take the approach I take. I suggest our students take a similar approach. Because of your success, I'm wondering, do you suggest to students to take the same type of approach as you do, or what's the kind of?
I mean, I'm a natural networker, and that's something that I derive a lot of energy from. My MBTI profile is ESTP, so it's somebody typically that creates a wide network of acquaintances. I know that not everybody is comfortable with networking, and they need some some help and support in that. So I totally get that not everybody has has a profile which matches mine, and preferences which match my own. But definitely in terms of my approach, I like to try and keep in touch with people. I like to try and follow where they're going, because sometimes we'll get a new company on to come and recruit from INSEAD simply because it's you've stayed in touch with someone within they've joined their first company out of INSEAD, then their second, and then maybe it's the third company that they join that's the one that's really keen to come and engage with students. So yeah, I think keeping in touch with people, having a wide network, keep making sure that you kind of follow people where they are, even if you're not having a conversation every day, is quite important. And I think that's the value also that students can find in their INSEAD network, is if they follow their peers, they kind of see where they go. At some point, a peer will be in a position to help them. So it's very important that they maintain those connections, and that they derive the value from the network that is undoubtedly there.
Great. Well, Michael, we have reached our time. Thank you so much for all of your insights and great tips. And I will probably be speaking to you next week at some point.
Yes. Take care.
All right. Thanks so much.